Welcome to the Edge of Greatness podcast. The path to greatness is never linear and requires patience and consistency. Join us on our journey as we peel back the layers of success, searching for that elusive core. Each week we will explore a different component of greatness, utilizing experts who have traveled some part of the path that we are all on. We aim to uncover insights into the areas of leadership, coaching, performance, overcoming failure, the power of habits, and so much more. We are all on the edge of greatness. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest. It is Natalie Allport. She is former Canadian national team snowboarder and now a CrossFit athlete, as well as being the founder of 93 Agency and the host of the All In podcast. So thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Sounds like you got quite a bit going on right now. But what I want to start with first is I noticed when I was watching one of your other podcast episodes that I believe that picture behind you is one of Charlie Brown. And since my name is Charles Schultz, I got to know, what does it say?
Okay. Yeah. It says, too busy working on my own grass to worry if yours is greener.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So tell me, where did that come from, and when did you decide to put that up on your wall and have that kind of be the centerpiece behind your video?
Yeah, well, one, I just love the colors. I think it's bright, and I'm always wearing like a black hoodie or something like that. So it's awesome. It's actually, I just moved a couple months ago, so it was behind me in my old office, and now it's behind me again. But yeah, it's by a company called Iconic, and they make some really cool canvases. They have like a Monopoly collection. I have some Muhammad Ali pieces out in the hallway. And then this one just really stood out to me because I think like comparison is a thief of joy. And I think a lot of us, especially, I work in social media, I'm an athlete, I create content. And so a lot of people get really caught up in the whole comparison game. And so when I saw this quote, I just thought, not only is it like just a super cool canvas, but it just really resonated. And my dad is also a really big Charlie Brown fan as well. So it just kind of hit on a few different points that I was like, this is going to be the canvas I'm going to put up.
No, I love it. I don't get to see a lot of the Charlie Brown stuff. Like when I was growing up, everyone was always asking, are you related to Charles Schultz? I was like, no, first off, my name's not spelled the same. So you don't obviously know who Charles Schultz is, but I thought it was really neat seeing a Charlie Brown picture behind you. So I had to start there. The other thing too, is that saying is actually perfect when it comes to athletes, because we do find ourselves comparing to all the other people around us more than we spend focusing on ourselves. And so I love that you're making that a point to say, look, I can focus internally, and whatever happens. The grass isn't always greener over there. We got to focus on our own grass. And I love that about the picture as well. So what I want to start with first for my audience is I want to dig into your time competing at the national level for an entire country, because obviously to do that and to get to that level, it takes a serious commitment, it takes a serious focus. And I think a lot of people want to know, what's it like being held to that standard, living that life, working and doing these things daily to chase a dream. So talk a little bit about that experience for being a national competitor.
Yeah, for one, I think it's just such an honor. Like when you really think about it and look back, like there's so many times that I look back and say, well, I didn't achieve my ultimate goal, or I didn't do this. But then I think about it and realize that I was, for example, say there was a national hockey team. There's maybe 20 some girls on the team, and then there's like the B team. And so maybe there's like 40 girls part of the national team program. Well, we have maybe 10 or less. And so I think about like how rare that is. Or for example, like triathlon, I think there's a ton of people that make it to the Olympics, but for us, it would have I think they only pick like 20, maybe 25 people to go to the Olympics. And then when I go further back and think like I have results in the top 10 at junior world championships, I had top 100 in the world tour, results. I think about like how rare that is, I suppose. Like, in hindsight, it was like, well, it's not number one, or it's not, this that I wanted. But then now looking back at it, I'm like, oh, that was really just such an honor, and just shows that like to make it into that top 0.000%, it just took so much work ethic and really to stop comparing myself to saying, not that number one, or compare myself to other sport athletes or things. I just think like, wow, it was just so much pride and honor to represent my country and to have people cheering for me who didn't even, know who I was, like, let alone like my family, friends, and community. But, you go to events and you just have people cheering for you because you're representing Canada. That's just a really cool honor.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think when you put it into perspective, and I love the fact that you can look back and enjoy where you got to, because as an athlete and as a competitor, you're probably in the moment going, yeah, I got to be number one. I got to be number one. So, but looking back and seeing that, and then also that realization that Canada's a winter sports like haven, right? Everything winter sports in Canada. And to be able to compete at the highest level in a country that prides itself on winter sports success is another thing that just kind of carry with you. Um, so tell me a little bit about what was it like on a day-to-day basis when you were working with the national team and competing and doing those types of things?
Yeah, so it was a little different than other sports actually when it first started out, because I think the year that I made it onto the junior national team was the year that they announced slopestyle snowboarding would be in the next Olympics. So that was 2011, and then 2014 was the first Olympics that slopestyle would have been in. And so they actually just kind of had to form this program. And so I made it onto the team literally with, like, someone messaged me, a friend messaged me on Facebook and said, "Hey, I saw in the website of like the national team that you're on the junior national team." I'm like, "What?" Like, even before they sent me an email, nothing. Like, it was, I had no idea what the qualification process was. They just looked back at my past season's results, I guess. Obviously, it got more formalized as it went through, where every single season, there's a whole criteria of what you need to do to be able to even be considered to be on the national team again the next year. Um, like, there was video, there's a whole criteria, you need to meet coaches who are reviewing it, judges, season results, like all these things are weighted. So things definitely got a little bit more formal, but I actually had no coaching going into to
Wow.
then. So all of a sudden I had to hire a coach. I had to get strength and conditioning. I had to work on my mental performance, even just for insurance purposes. Like, you can't go to these competitions without a coach. And so despite having the national team program, we still had to hire private coaching. So I ended up moving about 8 hours away from where I live. Where I live, there's no big mountains, and where I moved, it's actually no big mountains either. But there were some good terrain parks to train on and some good coaching programs. And ended up living with my coach's parents for a season. Trained down there and did that whole thing, and so that was a big, huge adjustment. But really, like, our day to day was just spending as much time on snow as possible. Really depended on the weather. Like, we would always do a warm up. We would, get our training runs in, gradually progress. We would come in for a late lunch. Usually after lunch is a little bit less intense, because that's kind of, you might be due for injuries because you're fatigued, so you're not landing things as much. You might be mentally a little bit checked out. So a lot of that, the kind of push of our day, was that mid morning. Usually in the evenings, I mean, when I was just working with my private coach, there was no, onus on you to go to the gym, but I was really into that. So
Mhm.
I did that. But when we were start going to national team training camps out in Whistler, then we would be hitting the gym with the strength and conditioning team afterwards, and doing that kind of thing. And then if there's a bad weather day, we just use that as a nice excuse for a rest day and recover up. And then if there's good weather days, even if you're craving that rest day, we usually took advantage, because that's one of the things with the sport of snowboarding, or really any action sport like that, surfing too. Like, you got to take advantage of those good days, because you don't know if you can get a week of wind and rain and bad weather, which is different than a lot of other sports.
No, yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you were just more or less kind of a trial run test study subject for the national team and the pioneer of the sport, trying to get it to go forward. And I'm sure they learned a lot from your time doing what you did. And then it has, like you said, has advanced it going forward from there.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how they've, like, really progressed. Like, I think my last season, we went through like 6 strength and conditioning coaches. Like, I felt like every time I went to the gym, there was a new coach. And luckily, like, I did my own thing, and it was like, usually they're just doing recovery activities, and they knew I was already, into my fitness and competing in CrossFit a little bit and doing some stuff. So they let me do my own thing. They just gave me free reins to do my own stuff during the season. But yeah, now, like, I mean, they have an amazing person who's in there, someone who came from Australia surfing. And he's got people to buy in more onto the strength and conditioning side. They have I think, just a better run program. For
Mhm.
example, it's so expensive to have a coach. I think my coaching program was $150 a day. And
Oh,
for someone who comes from, like, I had to pay for that all myself. My parents told me, like, we can't afford to send you, we believe in your dream, but you got to make this happen. that was really hard to swallow and like figure out how much I have to work over the summer or the sponsors I need to get to pay for $150 a day of coaching, despite the fact that, we also have this national team program coach, but especially when I was at the junior level and the development team level, like we didn't get all of the exact same support. And I didn't really want to make the commitment of moving all the way out to Whistler. And so we still had to pay for that. And even in my last season, I remember committing, paying for my coach. And then we get out to all these training camps, and we actually got coaching for once. So then I'm paying for a coach and so I was like, now I have two coaches, but realistically I probably could have saved my money. So it is interesting how, from the outside looking in, probably people thought it was more organized than it is, but it's definitely, from what I hear, getting better.
Oh yeah, just like everything with time, it gets a little bit better. So, what I want to dig into a little bit now is that experience that you had being a competitor and being an athlete. Do you feel like it's transitioned into the way you do your business and the way you live your life now? A lot of people that listen to my podcast are either coaches or athletes or ex-athletes, and a lot of what we do here and what I want to do is make sure that while we're pursuing our excellence in sport, when we're done with sport, which is going to happen, right? We all age out at some point, some longer than others. How do we take that and still pursue excellence and still pursue greatness? And so tell me a little bit about what it's like now that you're, I guess, out in the real world, doing the day-to-day, running a business and those types of things.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that athletes make great entrepreneurs or great employees if they want to be that as well, because athletes know how to adapt. And if they can trust their ability to adapt, they can do some amazing things. For example, if you're starting a business, you don't have to know every single aspect of the business. In fact, like some of the top entrepreneurs in the world, they talk about how they knew not even like how to invoice somebody or how to do any of these things. But what they did was they trusted their ability to learn. And so if you can know like, okay, I'm going to dive into this and I know I'm going to be able to learn. Or for example, in my time snowboarding, I would enter a competition and my parents would be like, isn't this like way above your level? I'm like, I'm going to like figure it out by the time I get there. And so I think if athletes can trust that, they'll succeed in anything that they do. And for me, like sport is the lens that I look at life with. So everything I do, I kind of look through the same mentality as I do with my training. Like I periodize my day, my work day. I know how to manage my energy so that like there's different times that I would, book podcasts like this versus times where I'm maybe in a low energy and just going to work on some creative ideas. And so I think there's just so many different skills that translate, and definitely those things of perseverance, hard work, time management, energy management, taking the rest and recovery, and then also just the consistency and the long-term mindset. Athletes invest decades of their life into a sport. And I think same thing, you have to think about the same thing when it goes to business, entrepreneurship, a career, whatever it is same thing, consistency and just putting in the work and the time, it's going to pay off.
No, yeah. Two things you said there really stood out with me. And one was we'll figure it out when we get there. And I'm going to touch back on that here in a second. And the other one is the part where you were talking about, and I lost it. Man, that sucks. It was really good too. Yeah. That's the worst feeling ever. Like I'm talking about one thing and then I'm still thinking about it and then it's gone. But
I have
want to
ADHD, so I feel you on that. That is
That's what it was. There we go. So it actually is perfect. So it was the periodization part, because that part, that organization piece for me, I think is valuable. And so I want to dig in a little bit first with the periodization thing, because I think periodizing your day is something that would be super valuable to a lot of my athletes and a lot of my business entrepreneurs who are listening to this, because we are so strapped for time and things that we can fit into a day. Tell me a little bit about that process for you. Like, do you set it up day by day? Do you set it up a week in advance? Kind of go into some of the details for me.
Yeah, so from like just a strategic overview to start is that like when I got into say like after my snowboarding days, I started competing in CrossFit and then also managing growing my business, because I wasn't like living at my parents' house and just traveling the world as a snowboarder. I was like living on my own, paying for everything and still trying to be an athlete. So it was really recognizing that stress is stress. I think, especially as athletes, we think physical stress is like the only stress that matters, but actually mental stress affects a lot as well. And so whether you're still balancing athletes and work and school, or you're completely just, work or school now, you still have to manage those stressors the same way, and realizing that your energy load is your energy load. You're not going to have unlimited energy. You can't just book back to back to back to back Zoom calls every single day and not expect to burn out. Same thing, like you can't expect to squat your 1 rep max every single day and not expect to, blow something out eventually.
Right.
So that's how I kind of look at it, is I try to, just from trial and assessment, and some of that just comes from years of, going through burnout and
Mhm.
going through some of the things and recognizing I have to pull back. But as so the first thing I do is usually I journal. And so that's important for me over the years to be able to recognize when I do get burnt out and some of those things that lead to it. I keep like a decision journal. So, for example, there was one time that I was hosting a podcast and I just felt like my ADHD was like on another level. Like I was forgetting a lot of things. And so I wrote that down and I recognized like what led up to that. And I realized I had packed my days. It was the end of the week, the end of the day at the end of the week, and I had just packed everything that like mentally I just wasn't there anymore. And so that helped me recognize in the future, okay, I can't schedule things then. Like I can't expect myself. Maybe some weeks I'm going to be like more mentally there than not, but I can't just trust that's going to happen. So I started being able to manage my schedule better. And then usually, yeah, I'll plan things out a couple weeks in advance. So try to just look over the week and say, okay, I can only do so many Zooms. I can only do so many things. And then, so I'll piece together those big pieces of stuff that I have and I'll put it right into my calendar. And then I'll look at these other things like I'm lucky as an entrepreneur, I can move some stuff around. And especially, for example, like every week I have to edit my podcast, or every week I have to like do some client calls, but I can move those things around. So then after I've got those kind of one-time things going, then I'm like, okay, I know how much energy these other things take. Where can I now shift them? And then looking at the empty space I have left, okay, is there some big projects that I'm like chipping away on? What times a day are they going to work? And then there's a few things I look at daily as well. For example, just knowing in the mid mornings is usually my peak focus time. So I try to make those more my linear tasks, or things like speaking that I want to show up and be present for. And then usually later in the day, as I start to fatigue, perhaps after my workout session, I know I'm not going to like get right back into work. I'll do more creative thinking. So like I'm kind of not at my cognitive high, but I'm able to just think of ideas that then the next day during my linear task moments I can execute on.
I love that. No, I think that's fantastic. And I think the breakdown of understanding where your energy's at and how to apply it, and what phases of the day you do best is so important for high level of execution. And I think a lot of athletes and coaches and just people in general don't succeed throughout each day because they don't understand those little things of, all right, well, at this time I end up having a low, so it would be a good time to walk to the water cooler and get a snack or whatever and let my mind and body recover and then come back to work instead of trying to power through it, and all of a sudden everything else suffers. And I think that's something that's extremely valuable. And the stress is stress comment really stood out to me. Did you pick that up somewhere, or is that something that you've kind of learned over time, or where did that come from?
Yeah, that came a lot from my CrossFit coaches, especially, they sat me down, they said, like, you have the potential to make it at a high level in the sport, but we know that you also have stresses in building your business and clients and all these things. And they're like, you can't really manage both at the elite level at the same time. And they realize like stress is stress. The reason, for example, my body wasn't handling more volume during like higher physical stress weeks was often because it was timed out with higher mental stress weeks, with work things. If I had a bad client meeting, or a project fell through, or something happened, that also affected my training. And so I had to get really cognizant of those effects. And yeah, so they really taught me like stress is stress. And I wear like a Whoop band and track all my data. And you notice with the HRV, like you can have a day off training, and so you're like, I should be in perfect recovery tomorrow, but you had an argument with a significant other, or something happened in your family, or something happened work wise, and you wake up with horrible recovery the next day, and you're like, well, I rested. Well, you didn't rest mentally. Like you have to understand that that quote, stress is stress, and mental and physical, they affect you, and they affect each other.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before. I believe it was a book I read. It was called Peak Performance. Have you ever read that book? It's
No,
I think Brad Stolberg and Steve Magnus. If you get a chance,
oh,
I think you'd
yeah.
like it.
You know what? I had a conversation with Brad about something business
Okay.
last year, and
Yeah.
then I didn't realize like until after our meeting, I looked up like his books, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like I should have kept him on this call for a lot longer.
Yeah, no, I like their stuff a lot. That and the Passion Paradox. I just read that one too. I think both of those fit well because it ties a lot of growth into sport, but also I think it applies across all platforms. And the stress is something that we need stress to grow. Obviously, that stress is vital, but obviously what when we've come to learn is too much stress without the recovery and the rest is where we start to see the breakdown. And I love that tie-in to the stress and balancing the mental and physical to do well with that. What I want to do now is I want to go back. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Were you gonna add into
I was
that?
just gonna say, like, when you look at, like, say, a periodized training plan, like a linear progression training plan in strength and conditioning, and you have 3 weeks of build, you have an overload week, and then a rest week. You
Mhm.
kind of have to think about the same thing, like mentally. For example, you're planning out for a big event. Say you're a speaker, you have a big event coming up, or you're pitching a big project. Like, there's a lot of things you're building, you're building, you're building. That's probably an overload of stress week when you're like giving everything, and you have to like rebound from that. There needs to be some days, and you can't just hop back into, you did this big thing, everything culminated with that, and then the next day expect to like be at your peak again. It's like you have to imagine it as if you just taper or peaked for a competition, and
Mhm.
now you gotta like rebound. So I like to look at everything through that lens.
Yeah, a little bit of a deload week almost.
Yeah.
So, um, the other thing that I want to get back to that you mentioned on was we'll figure it out when we get there. And what that brings to mind is this fearlessness of outcome. And for me, I'm a big believer that stretching our abilities and having moments of failure, as long as you have the right mindset, can be very beneficial. And I want to know if is that something that you've carried with you, or is it more of a confidence in your ability? What spurs that I'll figure it out when I get there mindset and mentality for you?
Yeah, so to me, confidence isn't knowing that everything is going to go right. It's knowing that you'll be okay whether it does or it doesn't. And so I'm a big believer of failing forward, which I see is on your hat. I'm actually in the middle of writing a TED talk, and it's in the works of it's about kind of the topic of failure, and how the lessons that has taught me, and just being someone who's able to just put myself out there and go through those things. And I think that it's just important, if you look at failure, it I like to put failure in quotations, because I don't believe
Mhm.
that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset, like you said. Like, I believe that if, for example, I didn't make the Olympics, but I don't look at that as a failure. Everything I'm doing now is just another step. Like, for some people, maybe the Olympics is like that ultimate step, but I believe what I'm doing now and the things I've learned about myself through the low periods and the things that I went through after that is just serving me so much more for this next stage of life. And so everything is building off those things. Whether I had, there's tons of businesses that I started as a teen that didn't pan out, or my business has pivoted in different ways, but I never looked at any of those things as failures. They're just learning lessons. And if my end goal is not necessarily, make $1 billion or get on the Olympic podium, what I've learned is like my end goal is to be the best version of me I can become, and that happens through learning and growth. And so putting myself out there and getting that feedback, whether it is through falling short on some things, is one of the best ways that I can push myself to learn and grow and progress. And so failure to me is not failure. It's literally just letting me adapt and get some feedback there to pivot and make different decisions.
I love that. And I agree wholeheartedly that without moments of setbacks or failure, we don't optimize our success. We don't consistently find new ways to stretch our abilities and get better and reach our true potential. And so, what I want to go from there with is obviously you don't look at it as a failure, but what is the biggest turning point in your life where a moment happened that others on the outside may perceive as a failure, but to you actually sparked the next phase of your growth as an athlete, as a person, as a leader, as a speaker, whatever it may be? What was that moment for you where all of a sudden you're like, man, that could be a really big low, but all of a sudden look at this door that it opened. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think an easy moment to pick out would have been not making the Olympics
Mhm.
and then, retiring a year later. But I'll pick a different moment because I think it'll be interesting to go through the process on something different. But so a year after I left snowboarding, I was super into CrossFit, progressing really quickly, trying to get my team to go to regionals. And then I ended up the first workout of the CrossFit Open, which is an online competition for those who don't know, that then back in the day qualified you for the regionals, which then qualified you for the CrossFit Games. I was feeling sick. Like I had the whole week before, I felt like I had like a bronchitis and a sinus infection, which I ended up going to the doctor and I did have. So trying to fight through because I'm trying to qualify, help my team qualify. And I ended up getting this chest pain right after the workout, and I did poorly in the workout. The chest pain didn't go away. I ended up going to the hospital. And what happened was I got pericarditis. And then I figured out a week later it was because I had mono. And so I had no idea. So I wasn't allowed to get my heart rate up for like 2 months. I like even driving, if someone cut me off, my heart rate would go up and it would like get bad chest pain. Uh, and mono ended up keeping me like 6 months out. And so people were kind of like, oh, you were overtraining or just like kind of all these different things. And oh, you had to quit the open. No one really knew what happened because I was just submitting like a score of 1 rep for all the rest of the workouts. And to me, that was one of the greatest gifts because I had jumped straight from snowboarding into like filling that void with this other sport. And so there I had 6 months where I could start prioritizing my family. We had my family, my younger cousins come from Austria. They visited for a month in the summer. And the previous year when they came, I was like, I'm too busy training. I could barely spend time with them. I all of a sudden could spend time with them. I could spend time with my grandparents. I could just try to figure out who I was outside of sport for a while. And so that was just a great learning lesson. And then from there, I ended up hiring a coach to figure out some of the things that my imbalances muscularly, shoulder issues, and just my training from there wasn't just do as much volume as possible, like the gym I was at. It was like hire a professional coach and figure out how to actually build myself and work on this long-term plan instead of like trying to go to the CrossFit Games in 1 year. It was like, how can I build myself up to not get injured, not overtrain, and do some of these things in the right way? And so that really pivoted into then I had 2 years to build up and ended up having my best open season after that in 2018 after dealing with that.
It's awesome. And I love the bright side of things. The I got to spend time with my family that I didn't get to before and that type of stuff, because I felt similarly when we got shut down here in Ohio where I'm at first. My first thought was, what about my business? What am I going to do? All of these things coming through my mind. And then, the first couple of days was tough. And I was like, I can't just sit here. This is impossible. And then over time, I was like, man, this is pretty awesome. I get to spend some time with my son. I get to see him in a phase where it's really fun to see him grow and change. And that mindset shift opened me up to a new avenue of things that I feel like I might have been neglecting a little bit. And I am now better for it. And I think that's a key component to, we get emotionally tied into a moment, and that emotion causes us to feel a certain way. And we ride that wave instead of stopping and taking a breath to allow our mind to catch up and go, well, wait a minute. There are other things happening that are okay. And from what it sounds like, that was what happened for you through all of this, is that in the moment you were probably like devastated. You were working so hard to get this happening, but then as things kind of started to slow down and the emotion kind of subsided, you found a new appreciation for what you had with the time that was given to you. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think that's like the best way to look at things, and like what you shared with your mindset of when things shut down. I think that's exactly the best way to look at things, and when these things happen to take them as learning lessons and pivot moments. For example, anytime like I'll make a business reference. Like I've had some times where I've had, really high earning years with these clients that I really wasn't excited to be working with, and they weren't great relationships, but I was like, well, I'm earning this much, I need to earn this much to then make this much. So I'm just like accepting things. If things had continued going well with those things, I would probably be in a place where maybe I'm making a lot, but just completely unhappy. Versus the fact that then when I was able to break off those relationships with clients or lose that client, it made it seem like a failure in the moment. but they were the biggest pivot moments for realizing, wait, what else is important in my life? Why wasn't that a good relationship? Where should my business pivot to make sure that those clients align? And so, yeah, I think that's just the best thing is whenever those things happen. And I think what taught me about those things was injuries in snowboarding, which happen so prevalently. You have to learn how to deal with them all the time. And so I had to learn how, like, okay, I can't snowboard. What else can I work on? How can I improve these other aspects? And so that kind of carried over into business, CrossFit, all these other things where it's like, okay, you can't dwell on it. There's no point, being upset because you can't change the situation. Just to figure out how to make the best of it and what lesson you can learn from it.
Definitely. And obviously going down a mountain speeding is probably not the safest sport that there is out there. So yeah, the injuries are probably part of the everyday occurrence for you guys. Um, what I want to know is there a tip that you would give or a pointer that you would make to help people kind of start to disassociate the emotion of a moment and then the mindset of overcoming that moment? Because it sounds like you have a natural ability to be disappointed, but not let it affect the next step. And I think a lot of people, like we talked about just a little bit ago, is the emotion of that moment becomes so big that it carries negative effects on the next moment or the moment after that. And I see it a lot of times where all of a sudden it snowballs and then they get into a really, really dark place. And so was there something that you would maybe give as far as a tip or a pointer for them to help separate those pieces?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is mindfulness. I think that's something that can help us separate, that our current emotions and the moment and just, be present and in the now and create a distance between our reaction and the event. So I think mindfulness for one, but I also think, for me, it was in a sense like failing a lot of different things in my childhood and my parents allowing that to happen and just, prioritizing effort rather than results. So they let me just try hard at things and then figure out if it sticks. And then the same thing with overcoming injuries, but I think we can do that in our lives without having these bigger failures. We can train ourselves with micro failures. So things like cold exposure or things like just training, like getting into the gym and doing things that are hard and being beat at work in workouts, or putting ourselves into these things that don't necessarily matter in our scheme of career, or if you're an athlete, like it's not directly correlated to making it as an athlete, but allow us to have these small failures to build that mindset that when you do have these big failures, you kind of have those repetitions built up. So it's like just like mental exercises and mental training to deal with these small failures so you can deal with the bigger ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the exposure to failure helps us start to understand that it's not catastrophic. I had a conversation with a person a few episodes back, and they were talking about when was the last time you hit snooze, because in that moment you failed your alarm clock. And thinking of like failure in such a small term as that and not so catastrophic was like mind blowing to me to think, wow, yeah, you know what? That's right. That like we have failures all the time, but we always look at the big ones and like get set back by them because it's like this moment of, I was trying so hard to achieve this, and then that all just is wasted. Well, that's not true. You still gain something from it. That moment might not have been the right outcome, but we can still be better for it. Um,
Yes, I love that because I think I talked to a baseball player a couple weeks ago, and we were relating on the fact. So he ended up not making it to pro. He really thought he could, but he was dealing with some things where for some reason he was failing the throw from catcher to pitcher, even though he had an amazing arm. Like it was like that short throw, just like a mental block.
yeah.
And so he ended up not getting to go to pro, not signing a contract. And then that was like his biggest failure. He dealt with a lot of things mentally. Same with me, not making the Olympics and then retiring from snowboarding. Huge issue. But then he went on to like work in a major wealth management firm, living this career that everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You're set for life. And without questioning, just left and started his own thing. And I was like, did that failure before of not going pro and learning from that make you just feel this freedom where who cares, I can leave this and go start my own thing? He's like, yeah. And so I was like, I feel the same thing. Once you had that big failure and have learned that you're not going to die, like it's things are okay, you feel this sense of freedom that you can commit, like I've committed so many hours into competing in CrossFit over the pandemic. I've come to the terms with, if I want to get back to competition, I could do it if it's going to be fun for me. But if not, I don't care. There's no time lost. I learned so many lessons training for that I actually have no need or hole or void to fill by, continuing to pursue this thing. I was like, you know what? I still think I have the potential, but if my injuries aren't overcomable, no loss to me. I learned a lot in the process. And I was like, wow, 5 years ago, I would never have thought that. But you get this sense of freedom from having overcome one of those big failures.
Yeah, no, I think if we look close enough at the people who are at the highest levels and the most successful in the world, they've all experienced some level of a major failure along the way. I mean, even though like I don't consider myself to be at any high level in my career at all, but I was a baseball player in college. I wanted to play pro. It didn't work out. And at the time when it stopped, I was like, now what? What do I do? But it pushed me down a path into fitness. And then I had, a cool trainer that I met that pushed me into training. And now I own a gym. And I get to do a podcast and talk to ex-athletes and people who are successful. And it's been one of those learning processes through failures along the way that each failure opens a door to the next phase of my growth. And I think that's the biggest thing is, can we learn from the mistakes that are happening? And so what I want to know is, with the people you've had a chance to talk to, obviously you got to compete at a high level, so you got to see some high level athletes there, but now also with your podcast and doing those types of things, do you feel like there's a correlation between the people who see the greatest success also having to deal with the larger failures?
100%. I thought about this for a while, is like, does struggle help you, get to that next level eventually? Because you see a lot of these high performers now, and especially the high performers who can enjoy their high performance, not the people who just won the lottery and now they're unhappy, not the people who started this business, suddenly it worked on the first try, but then they're unhappy dealing with this money and they're going down a bad path. Like the people who are achieving, but also just they would be happy with nothing. Those people with that mindset, I think 100% they learned those lessons at an earlier point in life. And it's something I think about a lot. For example, I advocated for mental health because I had dealt with it. And I think about it a lot because I'm like, I'm grateful for that time because it taught me everything. But at the same time, I don't want anyone else to go through it. And so I struggle with that because I'm like, that time did allow me to achieve what I've done. But at the same time, it was so painful. I don't want other people to go through it. So I do think that some of those things, I think we can avoid some of the bigger pitfalls from learning from other people. But I do think we have to have some of these failures, whether they're massive or micro. We just have these pivot points and these learning moments that, progress us into that next stage. Because the people who do, they just start a business and boom, $1 million, $1 billion, and it works the first time. One, that's pretty rare. You don't really hear that. But for the few times it does, there's a reason why most lottery winners just lose all their money.
Yeah.
Or some of those business people end up like betting it all on the next business because they think they can't fail, and they just completely goes down the tank. So then they learn from those moments and hopefully build better the next time.
Yeah, no, I love how you said you want to like help people not have those moments, but at the same time you're conflicted with like those moments actually help define who I am. So while I don't want others to feel that pain, I know without that pain I wouldn't be who I was. And I find that same thing for me as a parent. Like I don't want my kids to fall and fail and to have these moments, but at the same time I'm like, well, if you don't do that, you don't learn how to pick yourself up. So I struggle with that balance. And it sounds like that's a common thing for you as well. So tell me about kind of that process for you, because I know you're working towards a TED Talk, you're working towards these different things of helping people learn from your experiences, as what I'm assuming is kind of part of this process for you. What do you put into it? What do you hold back from it? What do you encourage people to do as far as like finding their own way and struggling through those difficulties? Where does that balance kind of fall for you?
Yeah, I think in a sense it's kind of like that quote of like, for example, training. It's like it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And so I like to think about that. For example, my TED Talk currently, the premise is going to be about failure and just trying hard. And I'm like I used a hashtag like a year ago, and some people caught on with it. It was like proud try hard, and I was like, you know what? I don't think, like, as a kid I was judged all the time for saying I'm going to be a pro snowboarder. Like, you suck right now. Like, you're not going to be a pro snowboarder. But I was just a proud try hard, like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think it's teaching people the skills to deal with those things. Because, for example, the mental health issues that I dealt with after snowboarding, I'm sure there's things I could have done preemptively to deal with that better. Doesn't mean it's not going to hurt and I'm not going to go through that time. It just wouldn't have been quite as bad, and I would have bounced back quicker if I had some of the skills to deal with those things. So I think with anything, it's not, bubble wrapping our kids It's just teaching them like they're going to be okay when these things happen and how they can bounce back from them, because that's how they do get stronger.
Yeah, no, I had a similar thing when baseball was gone for me. I went through a phase where I was like, well, who am I? And I think that's one of the areas too. Like, I don't want to assume with you, when you were snowboarding, did you see yourself as the snowboarder, or were you Natalie Allport, the athlete, and that snowboarding was just part of who you were? Because I think if we change the way we look at who we are and what we are, then when those things come to an end, or we fail or we fall short and that shift happens, it doesn't have as much of a mental impact on us as it otherwise would when we're only seeing ourselves as one thing. You know, would
Yeah.
you, was that kind of fit where you were coming from? Is, did you see yourself as the snowboarder, or were you a bunch of other things like you are now, where you're an entrepreneur, you're preparing a TED talk, you're a podcast host, you have all these other things, you're a CrossFit athlete. So there's multiple pieces of who makes up Natalie. Before that, was it just the one thing? Is that Sid?
Yeah, it's funny because I did, especially my last season. I'd already started my business. I had the CrossFit, and that helped for a time, especially transitioning. Like, oh, I spent 8 hours a day snowboarding. Well, now I'm just gonna spend 8 hours a day in the gym. So, like making that transition. But at the same time, no, like I completely wrapped my identity around being a national athlete. Like even when I joined my CrossFit gym, that's everyone thought I was cool because I was this national team snowboarder. They were all following my season. Everyone showed attention to me. Even if I wasn't the best in the gym at CrossFit, I still was getting a lot of just attention because I was doing this other thing at a high level and just using CrossFit. So then it started thinking, if I go to a party and people aren't going to introduce me as a national team snowboarder, will anyone like me? Is there anything cool about me that will help me make friends? My parents are amazing, but at the same time, of course, their parents are going to talk to their friends and say, oh yeah, my daughter, she's traveling this and doing this. So I thought, like, am I letting them down? All the people that have invested in me, like, so everything, exactly, my identity was completely wrapped up in what I was doing and being that national athlete, that I thought, what would I do, like, who am I without this? And so now I like to say I'm a human being first, and then a human doing second, like human being, not human doing. And
I like
that's
that.
how I look at things now, but only because I knew that I looked at things so poorly back then. Not poorly, but I think most of us get caught in that trap. And
Yeah.
we can't really afford to think about other things, right? The national team tells us, like, don't do school at the same time. Don't do these things. You need to give your all. My coaches sat me down and they said, if you want to make a run for 2018 Olympics, like, we understand you have your business and you love training, but you need to set that time off and spend more time on snow, more just doing this, right? And I started realizing I like these other things, and I don't want, what if I crash and something happens really bad in snowboarding, that I can never do these other things? And so that's where things started to change mentally there, and what led me, in a sense, to stepping away from the sport. But I think a lot of us definitely get trapped into thinking that's our only identity, when it's like, no, who we are as a person matters most.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I love that you were willing to share that, because I think a lot of young athletes especially struggle with being good at a sport and then being that sport, especially early on. If you are successful early and all of a sudden the name comes attached to the sport that you play, and everywhere you go, you're that person, it's hard to get away from it, and it's hard to change that mindset. So I appreciate you touching that, because I know it's kind of one of those subjects that probably gets a little bit tough sometimes, because when I think back on it, I still have emotional ties to being a baseball player. I've worked through that and I've moved past it, but it's still there. And so it takes a lot of effort to find a value in being something else and being good at other things, and knowing that your value isn't the sport you play, but what you bring. And so I appreciate that. What I want to do to finish up is, where can people who are listening connect with you, follow what you're doing, see what's up with you next, and go through the connection process with you?
Yeah. So just my name is my website. So natalieallport.com, Instagram, that's my handle, at Natalie Allport, TikTok, all the different platforms, same thing. Yeah, same handle everywhere. So that's basically the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and join us again next time as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness.
The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But no matter what happens, remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review our show. We are all on the edge of greatness.